So, let's briefly summarize what we know, shall we? The 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and finally, the 80s. Thank you.
Hello, I'm John J. Thompson, and I have never been fully comfortable with the title historian. Historians, it seems to me, are academics, and until recently that has never been how I have seen myself. I thought maybe one needed a degree or something to officially earn the tag, and while I've been studying the strange intersection of faith, music, and popular culture for about 40 years, and have spent my entire professional life trying to survive in that particular tension, to me, those pursuits have always been present. I listen to old records and find mentorship in the voices and stories of people who have walked these roads before me, but that didn't feel like the work of a historian as much as the instinctive work of survival. But yes, over 20 years ago, I wrote a book called Raised by Wolves, the story of Christian rock, and I've been labeled a historian in some movies, talking about these stories. Even this show could be considered to have a certain historical perspective, to be sure.
And it's all just a little bit of history repeating.
However, my guest today, Dr. Leah Payne, is every bit the historian. She is a professor of religious history and the author of the new Oxford University Press book, God Gave Rock and Roll to You, a history of contemporary Christian music, a book she has been diligently and publicly working on for a number of years. The final project, though completely accessible, offers a finely detailed look at the evolution of CCM, starting all the way back at the turn of the last century in the holiness and Pentecostal traditions and the proliferation of sheet music, temperance hymns, and the birth of Southern gospel music. Christianity Today's Russell Moore, in his appreciation of the book, recognizes the way Payne connects some dots between the formation of the CCM industry and the condition of the American church and today's polarized political realities. Charlie Peacock dedicated an entire episode of his stellar new Music and Meaning podcast to Payne's important work. So many people are talking about it, some enthusiastically, some taking offense. And in my studied opinion, it is rightly being recognized as a very important exploration of the formation of the Christian pop music industry, repercussions, and all. That's just not exactly what I was expecting the book to be, especially based on the title. I was recently a guest on Leah's wonderful podcast, The Rock That Doesn't Roll, and she cited some of my work in her book, so we've been on each other's radar for the last several years. We've known for a long time that at some point, our nerddom for this weird music must come face to face. I was fairly sure Leah would welcome some pushback, maybe some tougher questions than she was fielding in other interviews. I also invited our Patreon backers to submit questions, and a few did. Today, you will bear witness to this clash of the CCM historians. Brace yourself.
You can read it in the morning paper, hear it on the radio, how crime is taking our nation. This world is about to go. We need a good case of salvation. Get the love of God in our souls. We need a lot more of Jesus and a lot less rock and roll.
Another thing that struck me as I read the book and discussed it with Leah is the way she can reveal difficult, historical, and contemporary truths without completely dismissing the good things that came along the way. It all happens right after we take care of a little bit of housekeeping.
Hey, this is Ray, and I'm a Patreon backer of the True Tunes podcast. I have also left a rating and review of the show at Apple Podcasts. It wasn't that hard. It didn't cost me anything. But this show means a lot to me, and I know that reviews and ratings make a big difference when it comes to how and if others discover these conversations. Would you take a few minutes, maybe even while you're listening, but please, not while you're driving, to leave a rating and review. Even if you don't listen on Apple Podcasts, the reviews posted there push out to podcast platforms all around the world. Oh, and take some time to tell your friends about the show. Let's drive those numbers up together. Thanks.
Okay, we're back. After a few reschedules, Leah and I finally caught up in the True Tunes virtual interview suite to talk about her new book, The Larger Story, and more. Leah Payne, welcome. It's strange. We've talked a few times, but now officially welcome to the True Tunes podcast.
Gosh, what an honor. I am so honored to be here. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
So your book is officially out. God gave rock and roll to you, and congratulations on all of the buzz. I mean, it seems everybody's talking about this thing. Everybody in our corner of the world anyway. And I will tell you right off the bat, thank you. I am no longer the historian of obscure Christian music. There is somebody else in the bus, and I am happy that there is somebody in this weird bus with me. I'm thrilled to have you in this jalopy. And originally, what made you want to even tackle this thing? Well, tell me about yourself first. You're a PhD. You're a professor of religious history.
Yes.
Why tackle CCM?
Gosh, that's a great question. I've asked myself that a couple times, along the way.
I bet you have.
What am I doing? What am I doing? Something that I've shared publicly pretty recently is that right after college, I worked for a CCM producer, a producer of renown that goes way beyond contemporary Christian music. But anybody who knows anything about CCM knows about Charlie Peacock.
Anybody that knows about True Tunes does too. Yeah,
absolutely. A legend in every sense of the word. I worked for Charlie and Andy Ashworth, and so I had a small part of my kind of young adult life was spent in that world. And I should say, I'm kind of embarrassed that I was raised in a charismatic church, but I was not really into CCM as a young adult for a lot of different reasons. I was joking that I was into an even quirkier subculture, which was Broadway music. I was really into Broadway music. So I actually think that that's kind of given me a way of relating to, sometimes people feel like a little sheepish about CCM, but I'm like, fly that flag, it's great, who you like what you like. I worked for Charlie for a while, and then I went to graduate school, became a professor. And I think that I learned from my years working in the business about how powerful Christian music is, of many varieties. And there's, almost any kind of music under the sun. There's been a version made that could count as quote unquote Christian. What I remember was how powerful that was in people's lives and how formative it was. And so what I noticed is that as a religious historian, a lot of times the official ways that people are formed, like denominational policy or like written down theology, those tend to be emphasized, but the unofficial ways that people become Christian. And I would say that Christian music festivals and all the culture around contemporary Christian music would fall under that category. In my field, it does not get serious treatment. Like people just kind of think that, oh, that's, because there's an entertainment quality to it, or because it's part of pop culture. This is a flaw on the religious study side of things, like that because I think anybody who knows about CCM knows that it's just a powerful force in people's lives. So I just kind of kept coming back to that. And then I thought, well, I should write about that. So it is an academic book, and it's meant to take contemporary Christian music really seriously as something that had power to shape people's lives in many different directions. And I tried really hard to capture a wide variety of experiences with the music over a long period of time.
I got the rock and roll feeling in my soul. Doo-doo.
You ask me why I'm happy, why I wanna sing and shout. Well, I found a new religion that I couldn't do without the rock and roll religion. Makes me feel just grand.
Rock and roll, rock and roll.
I'm gonna rock and shout his praises all the way to the promised land.
Rock and roll.
Well, rock,
Hallelujah.
What was it that inspired you to focus your studies on religious history in the first place? Like what? How did that lane emerge? Just in a nutshell. I want to understand that perspective, because I'm a newly minted professor, but I'm a professor of music industry studies. I think everybody knows how I found myself here. But you go from Charlie Peacock and working in the music business to religious history. Like, tell me about that.
Yeah, well, I would say that it's sort of, in some ways, kind of the family biz. I'm a pastor's kid, so for me, I think some of it is just part of the family business. But then I went to grad school. I thought that I was interested. I can't remember. Maybe it was like ethics at first, and then I took a history of Christianity in America class, like a survey course, because it was a requirement. I went to Vanderbilt, so go Doors in Tennessee. I began to see history as a creative act, like that you're looking to the past and interpreting the past in a way that helps people understand the present. And it was a transforming experience to me, because I've always loved history. I don't know about you, but I've always been like the kind of kid where if you pause past the History Channel, I don't even care what's on, I'll watch it, you know?
Right.
So I've just always been interested in that. And the idea that you could serve a community by interpreting the past for them was really beautiful to me. And so I hope to always be doing it. It's just a real joy.
Oh, got shoes, and you got shoes. All God's children got shoes, my Lord. When we get to heaven, gonna put on our shoes, we gonna walk. We gonna talk. All over God heaven. Oh, Lord, heaven.
That then, I think, pulls back a little bit of a layer as to why you might approach CCM the way you did. This is not the approach that other people have taken, present company included, to exploring the story or the history of CCM. You go back to the roots of it into the holiness and Pentecostal movement, which is also your roots. So that is certainly a main feeder or fountainhead that predates CCM. And I like that you said you're studying the past to tell us about the present. I want to touch on that later, but tell me about this. When did that connection jump out at you, and how much of that is connected to the fact that that's the culture that you grew up in?
I would have to say that first, I had a college choir director who I mentioned in the book. His name is Derek Johnson, and he is a jazz vocal arranger and also was a part of the vocal ensemble groups that kind of immediately preceded the category of contemporary Christian, so pre-rock stuff. And when I talked with him about the book, he kind of knew like the Southern gospel side of things. So Sandy Patty, Larnell Harris, like that kind of anybody who was on the Gaither tour, he knew that crew. And I always knew that those folks were really important, even though they're not rock at all. So I asked him about it, and he said, "Well, you got to go back to those revival meetings, like those moments." And so I decided that I would start with the most, there were kind of two really formative labels in the early days of contemporary Christian music, Benson and Word. And Benson had got its start in a late 19th century revival meeting in Nashville. And the people who created that music really created the DNA. One of the things that I've always found so fascinating was the tensions around people who were creating music that was outside of what was mainstream CCM, like people that would have been featured prominently in True Tunes, for example. Those folks, like the constant tension that those folks faced trying to get an audience in the kind of mainstream CCM world, or at least their fans wanting them to get a wide hearing, and how the train tracks of CCM were so firm. Like it was really hard to get out of a certain kind of range of theological ideas. Like it was hard to have a dissenting opinion, in CCM. And so one explanation is that the train just started so much longer ago, and that there are these communities that it's like a really, really rich tradition of reinventing the same idea through music again and again and again, like the second coming, or ideas about the person of God that would be like triumphalistic instead of kind of a meditation in the idea of suffering or something like that. It was really hard to get very sad songs that are totally present in the scripture, but it was hard to get those on, like the mainstream CCM charts. Why was that? And one explanation is that it was already kind of set in motion, the tastes and the ideas. And so people who were chart toppers in the 1990s, sometimes they were like literally the grandkids of people who had Southern gospel quartets, or and I think that stuff is just like the pull of those family relationships and those networks are so strong.
Oh, it's a great, great morning, your first day in heaven when you stroll down the Golden Avenue. There are mansions left and right, and you thrill every side, and the saints always smiling, saying, how do you do? It's a great, great morning, that first day in heaven when you realize your worried days are through. You'll be glad you were not idle, good time to read your Bible. It's a great, great morning for you.
I did not grow up in a fundamentalist background. I grew up in the Episcopal Church. And sometimes I wonder if it's not just that because the version of CCM that survived, the one that we're talking about is the one maybe that has those roots in fundamentalism. I didn't see the sacred secular stuff from a mainline perspective that my fundamentalist friends had to later teach me about. Because when I launched True Tunes, I got protested and boycotted and all this anger thrown at me, and I could not understand, how am I the bad guy here? I decided to sell Christian music, and now it's the Christians that are mad at me.
Yeah.
But when I go back and look at it, I see other strings. It's kind of like any family tree. You got weird Uncle Bob, but you've also got strange Aunt Sue, and
right.
She might have been the one that came from the Black church and brought in a whole different theological, cultural, musical, ethnocentric perspective. That stream is also in there. And then you've got the mainline tradition that fought against the Scopes perspective and the fundamentalism and tried to integrate faith with science and all that stuff, and a higher version or a higher vision of art. And so by the time you get into the 50s and 60s, you've got artists, musical artists that are integrated. I mean, there's Jesus all over top 40 music from 1955 to 1974, when a nun has a number one song all over the world with the Lord's Prayer. And that's not CCM. Like, she has nothing to do with CCM. And that's what I feel like there's a little bit of a parallel world where there were other expressions. There's the Vatican II and all that stuff that most CCM people are ignorant of or deny, that there are other ways for this story to be understood.
Yeah, that's totally, I agree 100%. And I think some of it, and one of the lines that I tried to make sure was clear in the book is that at no point in time has the general American public, which for its history has been predominantly Christian, has the general American public shown sustained animosity toward Christianity, like themes, Christian themes. The specific themes that seem to be like the most energizing themes of what became the market niche of contemporary Christian music, those ones weren't always well received. But of course, there are so many other Christian themes, like themes about sacrifice and faithfulness and beauty. And, there's tons of them that were very well received. And that's what I think was one of the more fascinating and surprising things to me that I was not expecting to see, because I went into this thinking I'm going to study evangelical songs, and what I found were really specific versions of evangelicalism. Those themes, like typically songs, about teenagers not having sex, or like they don't top the top 40, mainstream charts typically. So like, the general public doesn't want to hear a song about why don't we have prayer in public schools, which there are lots of CCM songs that talk about that. But that doesn't mean that they're anti-Christian by no means. And I do think it's worth saying that even within the niche of CCM, there were dissenting voices throughout. For example, there was a concerted effort in the 1980s to try to end nuclear armament, or calling for the end of U.S. military aid in Central America, and aiding like sanctuary movements. And the question that I have is, why is it that the audience, like the listenership, people who consumed the music, preferred much more to hear about abortion, prayer in public schools, abstinence, over these other, what I would argue would be also very Christian claims? And so it's worth saying that even within the biz, there were lots of people who were presenting, different alternatives to the kind of generally accepted. There's like a small range of things that seem to be like most favored CCM messaging.
To me, what's confounding is the way the modern evangelical project has chosen to use music. As a church historian, do you see any unique patterns to the last 100 years of evangelical music use that are distinct in the way the church has used music? Is there something unique going on in this particular era and community?
I think big social movements often have accompanying music. And I think that the venerable Black church tradition of music accompanying civil rights protests and stuff is proof that there are thriving artistic communities outside the niche of contemporary Christian music that used music to incite social action. your listenership already knows this, that most of contemporary Christian music was sold, through its heyday, through Christian bookstores. And Christian bookstores they thrived mostly in suburbs. And in American suburbs, through discriminatory practices, were almost exclusively white for many decades. So a lot of the wealth that went to the suburbs went there. So if you think about it, then that kind of shows the audience and the genre benefited from market advantages that weren't afforded to other groups. So I think that's one reason why they seem so dominant. But you ask a question that I think is really interesting, because I hear you asking it as someone raised in the Episcopal Church, and then your first job was at a Catholic bookstore, right?
Right.
And those two groups did not use pop music the way evangelicals did. Billy Graham was so smart. He was one of the first people to really see the Jesus movement as like an allied movement. Like Jesus music is something that he could use. So I think that
he could use. That's the
absolutely
a means to an end, as opposed to the soundtrack of a revolution. It's the soundtrack to a culture war. Like it's like, this is a means to, we're going to co-opt this thing and channel it over here.
Right then and there, the Lord filled me with the Holy Ghost. I got a satisfied feeling. I've got it down in my soul. I've got a satisfied down in my soul. Well, I'm satisfied right now. My soul is satisfied. I said I'm satisfied right now. My soul is satisfied. People clapping in my hands. People clapping in my hands. People are running in my feet. People are running in my feet. I got to tell everybody I meet that the Lord satisfied. Satisfied. No more drugs. No more drugs. No more drinking. No more searching.
I didn't appreciate this stuff at the time because I was a kid. But when I was 16 and I went to all of the Christian bookstores and offered them the same deal. If you hire me, I'll run your music store and I'll double your sales and I knew what I was going to do. All of them offered me a job. None of them would let me manage their music because they knew what I was going to do. I'd mess everything up. The Catholic store was the one store that when I said, I'm going to do this, I'm going to market it. I'm going to bring in kids. I'm going to bring in punk rocker kids and heavy metal kids and gospel loving kids and hip hop kids. And the owner, Phil Tasketta, was like, wow, that sounds exciting, because his heart was to have a positive impact on kids. Now, it created some really funny juxtapositions when my people and the nuns were in the same space. But I didn't appreciate that True Tunes could not have happened had it not been for the different cultures, because you just only know the culture that you're in, so I didn't realize what was going on. But one of the more influential moments for me was actually reading an interview with T-Bone Burnett when I saw that he was Episcopalian. I was like, what? There's an Episcopalian musician who was in Bob Dylan's band? And he's the one that I remember saying, as a believer, he could either write about the light or about what he saw by the light. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, everything's on the table. There's all these artists. Not only the artists, but the fans of those artists were not looking for people to pre-certify music for them. They did like curation. Like, they wanted somebody to say, hey, if you like Bruce Cockburn, you're probably going to love Peter Case. Like, they like that because the world is still, there's too much music. But they didn't want someone to say, this is safe. You can trust this. You don't have to discern anymore. You can just listen to this. Yeah. And that's where one of the reasons that the CCM kind of more fundamentalist thing won that product war was because all of the consumers that didn't want that just left. Like, they went to the mainstream and said, I don't need a babysitter telling me what's safe, because part of the joy of engaging in art is discerning whether this is good and true and beautiful or false and bad and ugly. So it's a different proposition.
I'm gonna raise every voice. At least I've got to try. Every time I think about it, water rises to
More of my conversation with Leah Payne right after this.
Hey, this is Mark Feldbush, and I'm a supporter of the True Tunes podcast. I've been reading True Tunes since it was a print journal and first on the interwebs in the late 90s. When the podcast became a reality, well, I knew I wanted to be a part of this ongoing conversation. I'm glad to say that folks like me and many others support the podcast with monthly donations of $5, $10, even $20 that help to cover the costs of producing and hosting the show. As a thanks for our support, we get early access to episodes and high-quality lossless WAV files of each episode that we get to download. We also have occasional Zoom meetups, some special live streams, discounts on True Tunes swag, and a whole lot more. You can join me and the other patrons by visiting patreon.com/TrueTunes, or you can find the link on the show notes page. If an ongoing patronage thing isn't quite right for you, but you'd like to give a tip to help with the costs associated with this show, you can find links for that at the show notes page. Thanks for listening.
And now more of my conversation with Dr. Leah Payne.
I believe in God the Father, just between you and me. Lead me on, lead me on. I don't love, oh my love. But you're gonna have to save somebody. But if I can swim after 40 days,
sing your praise to the Lord. Come on, everybody.
Just put this love in my heart.
There's a bridge to cross the great divide.
I surrender all.
Why should the devil have all the good music?
Come and go with me to my Father's house.
I listen to the trumpet of Jesus.
Hear the bells ringing, they're singing that we can be born again.
Guide us,
God is in control.
there's a rainbow somewhere. Got an angel riding shotgun. Where the band won't see and the drivers stand. Little country church on the edge of town. Love crucified road.
Bless the Lord, oh my soul.
You're my brother, you're my sister.
To hell with the devil.
This is the great adventure.
Be in the light as you are in the light.
It's His reality that welcomes us back. More power to you. In Christ alone, I place my trust.
One of the storylines that I tried to capture was the power that moms had and exercised in this, because the more profitable the business got, the more well-defined this core imagined customer was, who was a mom in Christian bookstores. And I mean, I'm a mom, I'm a Christian. I want my kids to be Christians. That's my hope for them. And in the 80s and 90s, there was a ton of literature aimed at moms, parents generally, but moms in particular, coaching them on how to protect their children. People like James Dobson and in kind of even more conservative circles like Bill Gothard. And anyway, there's a whole lot you could say about that. But
I went to a Bill Gothard seminar, by the way, firsthand when I was 15.
And yet you still listen to the rock music.
To say it did not work.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, the opposite. But anyway, so that, I mean, I think there was like a real culture of anxiety. And so I think really the moms were in the back of a lot of people's minds, like how can we serve this market? And as you know, for the teens, I mean, that is just not a recipe for longevity in terms of, most teens end up, at least in the 20th century, using music as a real way of self-differentiating, from their parents. And so it was just never really going to work long term, because kids start sneaking around and they start, they probably start sneaking into your store, and finding music that is more, curated. I mean, you've mentioned how young you were, and I think that had to have been a really big asset because you were doing stuff for your peers, right? It wasn't a parental impulse, and a lot of the stuff. And I guess I feel a lot of empathy toward the project. It's like I understand wanting to protect your children, but I can also see why it doesn't work long term to do it in this way, especially now with the internet.
And I've heard other people in other contexts talk about how Gen X and the baby boomers had this aversion to risk and kind of wrapped their kids in bubble wrap. And so maybe this isn't unique to evangelical. Maybe even parents outside of the evangelical world might have also been overprotective of their kids. We were probably the last generation that, rode our bikes in the street and, played past dark and all that stuff. But I did have parents that dropped their kids off at True Tunes, and they would rather them learn how to discern and come to a place where it was still a healthy environment. And they knew that they were going to get exposed to positive stuff, but it was going to be loud and edgy. And the club was a little crazy. And there was one dad that came one night when he dropped his kids off to an MXPX show, and the dad snuck upstairs with an oven thermometer and put it up on the soundboard, and it was like 115 degrees in the club. And he's like, "You think this is safe for kids?" I said, "Oh no, I never said this was safe."
There's water.
Yeah, we got water.
That's so fun.
Laughed and I said, "This is the most dangerous thing your kids do all summer." Then there was another subset of Christians who understood that there was another way to be having fun and still exercising discernment. I don't think everybody was, but most Christians just never got exposed to that. They only got exposed to the pre-screened K-Love kind of pablum. Like they never really got access to the better stuff, because the gatekeepers would never let that happen.
Yeah, that was one of the things, like one of the meta questions in my mind was, why was it that bands like the 77s, who are, I think, universally critically acclaimed, people love, or Bruce Cockburn or whoever, why were those folks, did they not enjoy as why did they not get a wider listenership? And I think that that's what I'm hoping it explains, because it's not because the art isn't good. And it's not because they didn't have, really, really energized fans. I will tell you, I stayed up at night. I would wake up in the middle of the night thinking people are going to be so mad at me that I didn't mention fill in the blank band. Right. Because, it's 100-year history and you just can't fit everybody in there. But it's not because they didn't have really dedicated fans to this day, but it was because the market itself had a different goal. And it wasn't the curation of that art. It was really, I have a quote in there from Billy Graham where he's praying over DC Talk, and he thanks God for these instruments of evangelism. And I think that encapsulates the thrust of it, which is, it's just what you said. It was a means to an end, which for somebody like Billy Graham is no problem, right? Because he, from his perspective, the end is Christian conversion. But there were a lot of folks who had a different philosophy of art that was not the traditional Southern Baptist altar call, was not the peak. Of course, almost everybody who's mentioned in the book is wanting salvation, but not necessarily thinking of it in terms of like, okay, we're going to do an altar call, everybody's going to come forward. That's like a specific vision. And that's Billy Graham and many others were excellent at sponsoring musicians who would help with that. But for them, it's not about good art. I would guess that Billy Graham didn't particularly care for DC Talks music. I think he's like, oh, the kids are gonna love it.
I don't think you're out on too far a limb there.
Because he didn't care about that, right? Like that wasn't his aim. It wasn't to really savor the beauty of music. And so there were some unusual partnerships and compromises that got made along the way.
I've never seen the wind. I see the effects of the wind, but I've never seen the wind. Can you see me? There's a mystery to it. It's in my mind's eye. I see your face. You smile as you show me.
I think True Tunes was one of the first places that wrote critical, just analytical reviews of records back, 30 years ago.
How did that go?
we oh my gosh, most people genuinely appreciated it because we were selling the records and we had a money back guarantee where we said if we recommend a record and you don't like it, we'll give you your money back. So what we did was records that were just horrible, we just didn't talk about them. I've got this theory that one of the main benefits of music or of engaging in art is that it cultivates discernment in our brains. Like as a little kid, you start to get to know, what do I like? What do I not like? Why? What is this telling me? What does this lyric mean? What does this visual thing mean? When you reduce art to merely a product or a background or wallpaper, you're devaluing it. You're disabusing of it of what I think is one of its primary spiritual purposes. And so Christian art has had that tradition going all the way back as far as we can tell to the beginning of the church. So now we've got Christian art and a bunch of consumers of Christian product that are not looking for an opportunity to discern. And now we have generations of people that don't have the ability to discern. Now, it's not only the fault of art. They're part of a culture that just doesn't discern. They offload that job to other people for them. And again, I think when some people encounter that kind of art, it rubs them the wrong way because they're not used to it. You have to cultivate a taste for that stuff.
It's funny that you say that, like when you're talking about the practice of cultivating that. One of the things that made me just so nervous about writing this, which I'm not a music critic. That is not people like what they like. And there's no judgment for me if Steve Green and his wife singing Household of Faith is your jam, like you do you.
We'll build a household of faith that together we can make. And when the strong winds blow, it won't fall down. As one in Him we'll grow, and the whole world will know we are a household of faith.
The tradition that I try to trace is one of social action from these particular groups of people. And the earlier versions of it that I write about in the book are temperance hymns. So people who are saying, like that's a tradition that says we're going to change the American body politic in like really profound ways. We're going to get them to do things that people don't actually really want to do, which is give up alcohol. But we write this music that is so stirring. And one of the temperance movement people that I wrote about, she called it the magic power of song.
Can God deliver a dope addict? Can God deliver an alcoholic? Can God heal the sick? Can God deliver now? Say it again, say now. Lift up your hands and praise Him. Hallelujah.
Follow the boat and stray no more, stray no more, stray no more. Put down the bottle and we'll say no more. Follow, follow. Before you take another swallow, follow the boat and stray no more.
it's like dueling traditions. There's the tradition of art as a kind of deep reflection and something that allows you to work out these really big emotions, painful things. Like, I always think about what I hope for my children. And I don't know if they're going to go on to do art for a living, but hopefully for them, art is a way of feeling big feelings. I want them to have an outlet for that and to really be able to struggle and all that kind of stuff. And if that is a different tradition, then I want to change the world and act public policy. And I recognize that music is, and evangelicals, to your point earlier about, they were always really canny. They were smart about mass media. I think they saw the usefulness. Like Billy Graham wasn't just engaging with musicians, he had a film company and radio and television, and they understood right away like that could be used. And you see it now, like talk radio and like cable news and all that kind of stuff. Like, and I guarantee there's somebody out there talking about certain music being the devil's music on TikTok. Somebody's out there, right? Like millions of them, I'm sure.
Cause I represent a whole new breed of Christian of today. And I'm authorized and deputized to blow you clean away. I've got a weapon with 2 bullets that overcome all sin and crud. One bullet is called the word of my testimony, and the other one's called the blood. Satan! Bite the dust. Bite the dust. Well, how do you feel about that, devil? I'm a feeling mighty good.
I'm glad you did the book you did, because I have been working on a revision of Raised by Wolves to try to update it. Well, I mean, I felt like there's a lot of stuff that I kind of missed the first time around, and then I wanted to update the last 20 years. But now I feel like some of the stuff that I felt like I needed to go back and cover, I no longer feel like I need to go back and cover. I can just point people to your...
I miss so much though, because especially the rock scene. I mean, that was the really hard part, is that there's so much stuff there.
But you call it contemporary Christian music, and so you really did kind of define your terms. Like my book was the story of Christian rock, and I did kind of try to limit it. But it is interesting to me that you chose to call your book "God Gave Rock and Roll to You," and yet I would have liked a little bit in there about the fact that song is a perfect example. Argent, it's such a great example of the ping-ponging culture war thing, but it was one of the last kind of examples of Jesus rock that wasn't confined to CCM. And I would have liked to have seen a little bit more exploration of all of those songs that were CCM or Christian rock or Jesus rock before it got ghettoized and pulled out of the culture the way it did.
I liked the song so much for all the reasons that you said, that it really represents that the tensions around like the boundaries going back and forth and back and forth.
Appropriation.
Yeah. And so I in the end, I appreciate it because what I try to say really clearly is this is about the business of this particular market niche kind of came to be and what it came to mean for people and really what it meant for evangelical culture shapers. Like I talk about how there were people who had particular social agendas, some of whom I think a lot of your listeners would think are really praiseworthy. A lot of them probably wouldn't. And the smart ones figured out that you could partner with contemporary Christian music artists because it was a way to connect with a certain set of evangelicals. And that is what I wanted to look at. Not really not as I'm not equipped to evaluate the development of the sounds as much as I am like the networks and how those all or shaping theologies.
I do think that there's some misunderstandings about what the industry is. I think industry follows market. It doesn't create market. And so most of the people that work in the industry would love to have made music that was more artistically adventurous and creative, but the market didn't want it. My main beef has always been with radio, because they're the ones that kind of kept the hose kinked and wouldn't let the good stuff get to people, because frankly, whenever they hear it, they love it. I saw that with my own eyes when people came into my store thinking that we were going to be a typical Christian bookstore. Usually relationally, they could be won over. And when they heard good music, it was easy. It wasn't not hard at all. And if they ever had a chance to, and in Chicago, we had a Christian station that played a very diverse blend of music, especially at night. So it was possible. The problem was the gatekeepers, the people upstream, didn't want it to happen for whatever their reasons were. So
that's the thing, is that there's a certain kind of reader who will be very disappointed in this book, because I think there's a kind of flat understanding of the business, like how it worked. And there are a lot of folks who would comment on my Twitter account or whatever. I know Twitter's not an edifying place to be, but but they would say something like, everyone was just in it for money, like it's all about it. And I think that that's a very one-dimensional understanding of what was really happening. And because first of all, like people I think would be disappointed to know how little money was actually in it, in terms of like, a lot of people could have made more money as accountants. This is not like most of, I think the vast majority of people who were involved in the business were not in it to get rich. I think there was a sort of a simplistic understanding of how businesses run. And, so a lot of folks are in businesses that they love, and there's not everything that happens in that business they agree with. I would love for all kinds of things to happen in my job.
Mom and Dad, I'm fair house life. Lent the money you send me to the clown with a knife. My career as an acrobat hasn't begun, but I'm busy giving blood and shoveling elephant dung. Send money, run away. Why so tense? Dreamers' dreams will make sense in reality that comes from above. God is calling, there's no begging love. It's His reality that welcomes us back. Trust in a way, there is no other way.
For a lot of the bands, they told me this when they played at True Tunes or at Cornerstone. They'd be like, man, I thought I was here to just make cool music and like write songs and play shows, and then all of a sudden it was like I got on a bus that I thought was going to California, and it turns out it was going to Dallas, and all of a sudden it's like I got off the bus, I was like, wait, I'm in this town? This isn't the town I thought I was going to. And the same thing applies to people who were working at labels or working, it's like that. It was just that the bus that they got on was going somewhere that they didn't understand.
I have a real bone to pick with a lot of the kind of like the idea that certain bands or people who worked in the industry like sort of sold out in some kind of way, because they ended up being not okay with where that bus went.
Exactly.
Because I'm like, well, what were you doing when you were 19? I'll just tell you, I'm glad social media didn't exist when I was 19 years old, so there's no real record. No one knows what I was doing at 19, but everybody knows what Jars of Clay was doing, or, you know what I mean? Like, and I'm like, people change, they grow up, they start to think in, grown up ways, and it's okay. Like, saying, and I'm not using Jars as an example, but I'm just saying they were really young, when they were like when they started as a band, and, or anybody else, like kind of, they come to see the world as adults, and then they make different decisions. I think there's been sometimes in certain audience settings, people will say like they sort of betrayed some sort of something or other. And I'm like, well, like I'm so glad
Right.
no one
Yeah.
was paying attention to what I was
Right.
saying when I was 20,
I'm sure those people are too.
Just follow your desire. Leave it all. You're leaving all. Just burn it in the fire of everything you once knew and everyone that knew you. Remove the shoes you came on. Feel the earth you're made from. Pack up all your questions and just keep heading inland and come on home to me. Yeah, come on home to me.
More with Dr. Leah Payne in just a moment. Hey, my name is Rob, and I'm a Patreon backer of the True Tunes podcast, and I follow and listen to the weekly Spotify Gallery Stage mixtape that John curates for us every week. Each week, usually on Wednesdays, the mix is updated with around 40 songs from brand new releases to deep cuts and from across a wide range of genres including rock, Americana, indie, gospel, blues, sacred music, soul, and more. I've discovered tons of new songs and artists and been reminded of things I love from long ago. It's also great to hear a mix that blends up great music that is just good, beautiful, and true, without all the genre and market limitations and boxes I hear everywhere else. You can find the mix on the front page at truetunes.com or on the show notes page for this episode. And if you follow it, it will live there in your Spotify browser and update automatically every week. And don't miss the massive archive list, where all previous lists get saved. And as great as Spotify is for music discovery, please remember to support the artists you love once you discover them there. Thanks. And now more of my conversation with Dr. Leah Payne.
Well, now you better run. Run, run, I see. Somebody's calling you, and you better run. Run, run, I see. Somebody's calling you, and you better run. Run, run, I see. Somebody's calling you, might be back in my timing. No.
Well, I got a couple of questions from some of our Patreon people and even my brother Bruce, who's producing this with me. Bruce actually wanted to know, when you were tracing this back to the Pentecostal roots, did you see any impact from the Azusa Street revival in California? Did that come up on your radar at all?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's I have, I mentioned that there's lots of conversation about where Pentecostalism started, but I'm sort of in the Azusa Street camp, which is to say probably one of the largest, most influential Pentecostal revivals was at Azusa Street. So that, like those roots, a lot of what people would do at Azusa Street were, they did this practice called tarrying, which I talk about in the book, where they would, have really emotive prayer times where they'd sing and they would just wait for the Holy Spirit to descend upon them. And then a lot of times that would be manifest in things like speaking in tongues or words of prophecy, stuff like that. But music was really key to all of that. So yes, the Azusa Street revival is in many ways sort of the ground zero of the Pentecostal movement. There's some people who'd argue with me on this. Now I'm getting into academic speak. But yes, the Azusa Street revival is key, critical point.
There is nowhere else I'd rather be than in your heart. There is nowhere else I want to be but in your heart, in your arms.
wanted to know, as teens who were shaped by the youth group bands of the 90s have now become parents of adolescents, in what ways are you hearing about them seeking out or avoiding a curated musical subculture for their kids?
Oh gosh, what a great question. You work with college students too, so I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. But I think that the way that people consume music has changed so radically. I don't think it's possible to do what people did in the 80s and 90s, which is for a couple of reasons. One is that the idea that there could be a curated kind of parallel media universe depends on a kind of mainstream canon. So it's like, okay, everyone in the 1980s knew who Madonna was and Michael Jackson and Prince, or people like that. And so then the traditional CCM model might be, okay, well, we can find alternatives to that. But the way that people consume music now of any kind has changed because of streaming technology. So even the act of creating a comparison chart, there are some organizations that still do them, but it is wild because there's just so many different kinds of music. It's like you can't just be like, oh, here's the top 40. It's like the top 4,000, So I think that's kind of impossible. And I sort of wonder, and this is like a question for your lane and for rock critics to pick up, and music critics generally, which is, I don't know that music has the same shorthand power for signifying identity that it used to have. I have talked to a lot of people who were raised on CCM who really don't exactly know what to do about how to, because some of them had a great experience, still have wonderful memories, singing Big House and youth group and doing all this stuff, but CCM as an industry and all the kind of organizations that supported it is really diminished. So it's not as easy to find like the Big House that would have existed. A lot of it's worship music. Some of the folks who I've talked to who would want to create that don't have the same resources. Then there are some folks who are like, this was a big mistake. I don't want to do that. I'm going to let my kids listen to anything. Or some of them are more on the kind of modeling a certain sort of behavior and, growing with their kids and, slowly introducing more and more variety.
Yeah. And I there are some students who really love CCM, and definitely worship music and indie worship music is more popular than kind of mainstream CCM. But most of the students are not interested in either, even if they're very serious Christians. They're more interested in independent music.
Told me you love me on the sun, baby, you still for the same woman, baby, you still want me in the worst ways, babe. I can't put up with the games you play, but I need your eyes on me, babe. Can we just get through the weekdays?
What I've tried to do with my kids all their whole life is to expose them to everything good, and then talk to them when they're interested in talking about music. Just talk to them about whatever they want to talk about, but really challenge them to listen deeply to everything. Just last night, my son and I got into a text volley. He's off at college himself, my youngest, and he said in the text, "I just heard Sting's All This Time for the first time, and my life will never be the same before."
What a wonderful moment.
And so I was like, wow, that is a great song. And I let it sit for a minute. And then I said, so what do you think the river in that song represents? And it turns into this back and forth where he's like, well, what about this? And I said, now what lyric in that song do you think I would disagree with most? And he immediately thought it would be the part where, well, if Jesus exists, how come he never is here? And I said, no, I love that line. That's classic lament. I don't like the line about when he says the thing about basically in congregations we go mad, we only get better one by one. I said, I think that's a product of the 80s and individualism.
Yeah.
I said, I think we do get better in the sense of community. And he was like, this is blowing my mind. And they want to learn how to discern that stuff and listen deeply. You can't force it on them, but you have to be available for them when they're interested in that. And they're smarter than you think. They're smarter than you, and they're smarter than you think they are, and so you have to be willing to be taught by your kids too. So when they come to you and say, hey, I want you to hear this thing, I think you're going to like it, or then you have to let them teach you.
Blessed are the poor, for they shall inherit the earth. Better to be poor than be a fat man in the eye of a needle. As these words were spoken, I swear, I hear the old man laughing. What good is a used up world, and how could it be worth having?
I'm taking notes over here, parenting notes. I really like that because, I mean, one thing that I've noticed is that there are lots of artists who are very publicly Christian who are not anywhere on the, the so-called charts. And what do those even mean anymore? It's sort of hard to say because the internet has disrupted a lot of that. But they are robustly Christian, but they're finding audiences outside the niche.
Yeah.
So they're some people are like, is it over? I'm like, no, there's tons of artists who are creating incredible stuff that is, and some of it is like super, super traditionally evangelical. It's just, it exists, outside of the boundaries of CCM. So there's still like really lively art scenes, but I really like what you said. And I hope to do that with my kids, because watching them, grow and mature and just take on new information is like the great joy of my life.
Never mind yesterday's night. Step outside, turn your gaze to the sky. Feel the morning light. Never mind yesterday's lies. Please realize you are even more wondrous in my eyes when the sun shines bright, illuminating your scars.
Okay, I got one last question from Paul Colligan, and it kind of relates to what we're talking about. He said he couldn't help but think of the artists during that time who were on the side of this all, producing the art that they wanted to produce, even if it meant not being found at the local Christian bookstore, thinking of the quote, "The world does not need more Christian literature, it needs more Christians writing good literature." Did you hear from any artists who felt like the Jesus music or CCM, the Jesus per minutes, was a thorn in their creative or spiritual side, or did they even notice?
Oh, in terms of like the folks who were really in the CCM business?
Like being pushed to make that, like that.
Yeah,
did you talk to any artists that felt that pressure and left to the sides, or
Yeah, I did. And I won't speak for them here, but I did. I talked to several who felt just the tension. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that they were quite young and were not necessarily aware of the weight of what it meant to be a CCM artist. They weren't, if you're a teenager, you're not necessarily going to understand why moms are so mad at you or something like that. And, I heard a lot of stories about that. Or for example, if you are not from the revivalist tradition, you might be not totally understanding why people were irritated that you wouldn't do an altar call, because there's plenty of ways to be Christian that doesn't involve that. But there were a lot of expectations on artists. So yes, I talked to a lot of folks who that was just frustrating for some. But, I also talked to some people who say this is something you've done. Your grandparents had a Southern Gospel Quartet and you became an inspirational artist. And so for some, it's just like, this is great. Like they're totally on board with the kind of all the emotional beats that go through like a traditional evangelical revival meeting. Those ones tended to enjoy it, I think, more. But the folks who didn't either, some of them struggled through and they're still kind of struggling with that. And they feel that tension is a part of their ministry, and that can go to a lot of different ways. And then others just were like, this is not for me. I'm out.
Sometimes what you need is what you fight. Like a wounded man out on the run, like shadows hiding from the light. But your love is what I was running from. Your hope's a seed you have to sow. When you let it go,
it comes alive. So you stretch your arrows on the bow, and you pull them back and watch them fly. My heartbeat, my oxygen, my banner, my home, my freedom, my song. Your hope is the anthem of my soul. Oh.
Is it part of your duty and job as a historian? You are so neutral in this. Like, you say things like rich history. You tell stories about these people like Amy Semple McPherson.
Oh, yes.
And you tell stories about people that are often kind of charlatan-y type showman, crazy, like, and you say it with such winsome, like, it wasn't that precious, isn't that just wonderful? And then and the whole story culminates with like January 6th and this. It seems like you don't really pass judgment on any of it. You're just sort of telling the story, but I don't really get a sense of your opinion. Is that just a boundary you set for yourself?
You know, I'm a human being, and I definitely have opinions and a moral outlook on the world. Yeah, I have a special relationship to Amy Semple McPherson, so that's why I got such a kick out of that. I'm glad you brought her up. And I do have a sort of thing for I joke, you know, because I come from the Pentecostal tradition, that Pentecostals are like the jazz hands of American religion, you know. So I kind of have like a soft spot for even the sort of, yeah, I'm going to steal these airwaves, you know. It's all for the Lord. So I kind of have a soft spot for that. So what I'm trying to show is how music is shaping evangelicalism. And I tried to make it to where I tried to write in a way, and not everybody agrees with you, by the way. I've seen some reviews where they say I've got an axe to grind and stuff like that.
It's
and
the loveliest axe I've ever seen.
I could have really gone for it, you know. But anyway, so I appreciate that you say that, because I really tried to write in a way that everyone who appears in the book feels fairly represented. Like that I didn't represent a distortion of what they said. You know, there are some folks who are just pretty extreme, and so, you know, they for example, some of the comments about purity culture, I didn't have to, I don't think that I had to like pass any moral judgment. I'm just putting the words out there, and they sort of stand for themselves, you know. So I try to show, you know, what is the effect of these things. I hope that what people see, kind of one of the big swings that I'm trying to accomplish with the book, is to show folks how certain kinds of music and musical communities have become a dominant strain, which made something like the evangelical presence at January 6th happen. Like, this wasn't an accidental thing. And so I hope that that allows us to see, like, we should be paying attention to this, is one of my things. You know, like, we should be looking at which songs are energizing people, which communities are creating those songs, because they are going to shape our future. A lot of the surprises that people felt, I think, when January 6th happened, and a lot of the actors that are involved in it, they have all known each other and been working together for a really long time. And they're not hiding it, really. It's just we haven't been paying close attention, I think, because it's that unofficial theology. Like, one of the, you know, really prominent Trump supporters that I talk about was Amy Grant and Michael W. Smith's pastor back in the day. And he has continued, Don Finto, you know, he's continued to be a major player and had really friendly relationships with a lot of these like ultra charismatic people. And he's not really hiding it, but I think because it wasn't like, people were paying attention to people like Jerry Falwell, and they weren't necessarily thinking like, well, what's the music of that community and how is that shaping things? I tried to show respect for the power of it.
Lamb of God's now an action figure with one pierced hand. He pulls the trigger as he texts his thoughts on Skype and Twitter. He's big and with six-pack abs, barbed wire tacked, reverse ball cap with his building back. He's a real go-getter. Here's the end of times as horror story where the troops reclaim lost territory. All this brawn and guts and glory, stealth released. We will not cease to kill for peace. We'll slay the beast, increase our blood-soaked inventory. Soldiers to the Range Rovers, laser tanks and bulldozers, slay Antichrist as we go on with a high-tech tribulation force.
Dr. Leah Payne, thank you so much for taking time with us today, and thank you for the book and the time you put into this and taking it seriously, and thank you for even the difficult stuff and connecting the dots where we wish it hadn't gone. And I do think you're right that when we take our time to study the past, it can tell us about the present and maybe even the future, and so that's important stuff. So thank you for being a good role model for people like me and making me glad I'm at school.
Oh, likewise.
So, giving me hope for my future as a teacher. So
your students are very lucky to have you. I have no doubt about that. Thank you so much. And thank you for being in conversation with me over the years. It's been a real pleasure.
History is an unwieldy beast. Each of us has a past that brought us to where we are today. We also share collective stories, communal narratives that speak into our formation, for better and worse. Some of us live as if we are completely autonomous, independent of our past, each other's pasts, or the larger stories that brought us to where we are today. I know I have done that. Some live as if we are stuck to those stories, locked into their preordained scripts. Some become defensive when their beliefs about those stories are challenged. Historians work to study those stories, to trace the threads, examine the evidence, and lay them out for our consideration. Religious and political leaders often frame history for their own purposes, using it more emotionally, less factually, to stir their audiences in certain ways, because history can often become whatever we want it to be. It's sort of a spiritual Rorschach blot. We look at it and see the images that reinforce the ideas we desire. As I have confessed, there is a lot about the roots of CCM to which I do not and have never related. I don't share the particular denominational or cultural heritage, for instance. While I didn't fully appreciate those differences when I was a kid, I sure do now. But I have been deeply challenged by the graciousness and warmth with which Leah approaches this subject and her own cultural and historic ties. She has found a way to be clear-eyed and honest without the usual cynicism and bitterness that we often see in these cases. Her posture is inspiring me to be bravely honest about the stories that have formed me, willing to re-examine certain prejudices and suppositions, maybe allowing some light to shine on some blind spots so that I can put away childish things without succumbing to the temptation to demonize or belittle the people in those communities. All history is complicated. Can I cultivate a gracious discernment? Can I engage in that complicated work, even embrace it? Or will I give in to the temptation to dismiss anything that challenges my position? How might my attitudes shift if I were to assume the best about the intentions of others and to carry the deep listening I apply to great music over into deep listening to people with whom I do not share the same view of history? Maybe, if we dig deeply enough into our shared experience, we will find that we have more in common than we think. Okay, I'm climbing off my soapbox now. That's going to do it for this episode of the True Tunes podcast. Thanks again to Leah Payne, of course, and I also want to send a special shout out to our Patreon backers. We could not do this without your help and support. If you would like to join the group, head over to patreon.com/TrueTunes, or if you'd like to give us a one-time gift, you can find the PayPal link on the show notes page. And thank you for doing all the other stuff, leaving us the ratings and reviews at Apple Podcasts, signing up for the email list, and subscribing to the weekly Spotify mixtape. And thank you to friends like Gar Sager and others who have helped curate that mix lately, as I have been consumed with my work as a student and as a teacher. That mix just keeps getting better and better. For more information and links, including a list of every song used on this episode, check out the show notes page at truetunes.com/GodGaveRock. And if you would, spread the word about the show and help us get it out there. This podcast was written and produced by me, JJT, with co-production, editing, and sound design by Bruce A. Brown for Gyroscope Productions. Our theme song is a special instrumental mix of Full Circle by Phil Keggy and Rex Paul. The contents of this program are protected by U.S. copyright law and are the intellectual property of Gyroscope Productions, with the exception of songs or clips that are from previously copywritten materials. Everything on this episode is used by permission or under fair use provisions. This program is intended for the private use of our listening audience. Gyroscope Productions can be reached at jjt@truetunes.com or P.O. Box 60401, Nashville, Tennessee 37206. Until next time, this is JJT reminding you that it's never too late to change your mind. Peace.
If you love the